Welcome everybody to this Flow 360 online training session. Today's webinar is going to be looking at targeting of help desk issues and the various manager preferences that relate to how that whole process works. I'm logged in as Tim, the primary manager on our demo website at King's College. And I wanted first of all just to take an overview of how the targeting works from the outset. So if I go to my King's College site, I have the Personnel tab. And on the Personnel tab, I can see the setup for all of the different managers for each of the individual service areas on the King's College site. Now, the minimum that's required here is simply that there is a primary manager. So if you were coming into this from the beginning and that is all you had a single primary manager. So that is in effect the line that is in orange on this form. Then for all help desk issues, all help desk service requests, they would be targeted directly at the primary manager. How do I know that Tim is the primary manager? If we look at the column headers here, there is a P above this column, and that identifies Tim here as the primary manager. And if I hover over that with my mouse, actually, it confirms that that is the case. Moving on from just the primary manager, who really has the responsibility for setting up how the entire help desk functions across the site, but beyond help desk, the primary manager also controls many other aspects, most other aspects, in fact, of how Flow 360 will function on their particular site or on the sites that they are responsible for. So that is the single fallback if that's all you have. If we have separately a help desk manager set up, a primary help desk manager, then all service requests and fault reports by default would then go to the primary help desk manager. So at the moment, we can see here the primary help desk manager is this column with the H in it, and currently that is also set to Tim. So Tim is both primary manager and also primary help desk manager. But if we were to change that to somebody else, then of course the help desk manager would be the first port of call for new fault reports or service area requests where nothing else has been already set up. What we can see in this particular setup here, of course, is that we have many other service area managers identified. And the ticks in the columns from the H column, which as you know already is the primary help desk manager, all the way through to GR for grounds, these are all the main different service areas. So we have BK is for bookings, so that's room and resource bookings. Vehicles is covered by the V column, so that's the vehicle bookings service area manager. IT, self-explanatory, hopefully. C is for cleaning services. HK is housekeeping services. Sorry, C is for catering services. HK is for housekeeping services. CL is for cleaning. GEN is for general services, and that tends to include portering maybe as well, possibly logistics. And GR covers grounds service areas. So that set of columns from the H through to GR, these are your main service area managers. And the targeting of help desk issues initially is simply based on that set of managers. So if we go through to my primary manager preferences, where a lot of these things are controlled, I want to just point you first of all at the help desk tab, and we're going to look at this one setting, target help desk issues based on, and at the moment it's set to issue and work type. I'm going to change that over to issue type, and we're going to have a look at how that works now when we're logged in as a general member of staff. You need to remember that if you're logged in as a manager, you generally have override of many of these things anyway, because you have a higher level of clearance in the solution. So in order to see the effect of some of these settings, we need to be logged in just as a general member of staff. So those of you that are used to these tutorials will be quite familiar with Anne Jeffries, perhaps. And I'm logging in as Anne, who's a member of staff. She's also, as it happens, a member of the boarding house staff, so she has a slightly higher level of clearance. But what she will see in the help desk is the same as any other member of staff would see. So if we go through to start logging a new fault report, some of you will know, of course, or hopefully you all know, that there is an option to set this up so that general staff, by default, use this step-through process, which takes them a form at a time through confirming the location of the issue, then specifying the particular issue type and possibly work type as well, and then logging out. I'm going to switch over by using this button up here that says full form. I'm going to switch over to the full form because it's a little bit easier when we're just making changes here to see the impact of those changes. So the default on this particular site, on the King's College site, is that premises is the default issue type. And you can see that that's going to be targeted at Tim Jones, who is the primary manager, also the primary help desk manager for premises issues. If I select catering service, then it's going to change the target manager to Joan Wilson. If I select cleaning services, then it changes that over to Simon Davis. If I select general services, that's also Simon. He's covering more than one area. If we select ground services, that goes to James Park on the grounds team. So all that is happening here is that the targeting of these issues is based absolutely on those service area manager identified on the personnel tab at the site record. And remember that this is on the site record, which means potentially you could have a completely different manager set up on a second or other site. So if we go back to the premises issues here, it's going to Tim Jones, and it doesn't matter what work type I select here. If I select electrical, it's still going to Tim. If I select logistics, it's still going to Tim. If I select joinery, it's still going to Tim. So because the primary manager preference is set to target purely on issue type, what you do with work type helps identify the type of issue for the person dealing with it, but does not affect how the issue is initially targeted. But let's see what happens if we go back into our primary manager preference and change that one setting. So I'm logging back in, that's Tim. I'm going back to my manager preferences here by clicking the preference button. I'm selecting the help desk tab, and I'm going to that one setting, target help desk issues based on now issue and work type. So I've made that one change, and I'm coming back in as Anne Jeffries. And let's have a look at how that has changed the way the targeting works. So I've come back into my full form. Premises is still the default, and it's going to Tim Jones. Fine. No change so far. If I select, however, electrical as the work type, now the targeting has moved. The targeting is now saying that this issue will be sent to Edward Lee on the electricians team. And if I select joinery, for example, then that goes to Peter Anderson on the joinery team, on the joiners team. So now the targeting is based on not just the issue type, but also the work type. And if we go, of course, to the other service areas, then we get different work types available that are linked back into that particular service area. So if we have a look at the team setups, and let's see how that is set up. How does that targeting work? How does it work that when we go to premises and we select joinery work, how is it targeted at Peter Anderson? For that, I need to come back into the solution as Tim, as my primary manager, and we need to have a look at the team setups. So I'm going to click the little home button to go to my manager home. And on my manager home, I've got the employees tab and then the teams sub tab. And let's have a look at the joiners team. Now, the joiners team is actually just one person. So a team doesn't have to be multiple people. A team can be set up in order to facilitate this targeting, and it could just be a single person. And of course, the team lead or the person in charge of the team does not need to be the service area manager. It can be someone completely different. The key thing here is the third tab along here that says Helpdesk Work Type Remits. And now we can see the joiners team has a single remit for joinery work. Now that means, as you've just seen, if we're logged in as a member of staff and we select premises as the main issue type, but then joinery work as the work type, that then targets the issue to the joiners team. And to add additional remits for teams, you simply click on the little plus button here, select new work type, and then we get our full long list of different work types. We select the one we want and we add it to the list. So if we have a look at some of our other teams, let's go back to my main teams list and we look at the maintenance team, for instance, they have specifically mechanical, brickwork and blockwork and other premises issues. Housekeeping team simply has housekeeping services as the remit. The grounds team, similarly, just ground services as the remit. Catering team, and so on, just catering services. We can carry on just sort of stepping through these. I wanted to show you one additional one. I mean, we've got things like health and safety team, where we might have health and safety remits set up, vehicle bookings, the general bookings team, the electricians, the porters, the works committee. ICT networks. So ICT networks is specifically just that sub-work type for networks only. And similarly for AV and for the main IT teams, the general team. In fact, we have no specific remit set up. So the IT general team is one that is available for a service area manager to pass issues to, but it is not involved in the targeting of issues. So you can very precisely control exactly where issues are targeted based on those primary manager setup. First of all, how are we targeting the issue? Based purely on issue type or on a combination of issue and work type? And if it's on a combination of issue and work type, then the work type remits for the individual teams come into play. Note that even if you've got it set up to target based on issue and work type, and there is no team with that particular work type selected, then of course the fallback is it simply goes back to targeting based on issue type. You will never end up with a situation where an issue is simply not targeted. There is always a fallback. So that if we're targeting based on issue and work type, then first of all, it's going to look for a team or an individual with that specific remit. If it doesn't find that, it will look for the service area and the service area manager responsible for that service area, and it will go there. If it doesn't find that, it will look for the primary help desk manager, and if it doesn't find that, the ultimate fallback is that it simply goes to the primary manager, but it always goes somewhere. I wanted now just to have a little look at some of the other controls that are on the manager preferences. So let's go back to the start. I'm just going to jump into my preferences, and I'm currently logged in as Tim. And as Tim, when I go to my preferences, I see not just my personal preferences, but all of my manager preferences as well. And I've got a number here that are relevant, but particularly I want to look at the primary help desk manager preferences, which is the one we've already been looking at, and that particular setting for target help desk issues based on either issue and work type or simply issue type. And then alongside that is the services tab, which lists the service manager preferences. Now, what you may notice if you switch backwards and forwards between those two is that actually quite a number of the service manager preferences are duplicates, effectively, of what is available to the primary manager on the help desk tab. So the primary manager help desk preferences has things like disable help desk chargeable option, target issues based on. Include help desk services work types in main list. We can govern how the work type lists function. Hide work type option on new help desk issue form. You may have noticed when we were stepping through some of those different service area requests when we were logged in as Anne, that some of them had the work type showing. Some of them had the work type showing and it was optional with black text on the label. Some of them had the work type showing and it was mandatory as a setting with the text on the label in red. And that is all controlled by the service area manager. So again, this is where we have some replication across from the primary manager to the service area manager. So the primary manager has these settings: hide work type option on new help desk issue form, and help desk work type is required. And those two are linked together. So if we say hide the work type option, then we cannot also say that work type is required, clearly. If we say that work type is required, then the hide work type option would automatically flip back to no, because we've said that work type is required. But generally, you would probably say for the primary manager, you wouldn't want to insist that work type is required. Although I know we have some sites that prefer staff to work in that way and for the work type always to be specified, in which case the primary manager simply has that set to yes. An individual service area manager could override that. So the individual service area manager also has those two settings here: hide work type option on new help desk issue form and help desk work type is required. So those are both available to the service area manager as well. So what is the precedence here? If someone selects a service area where the service area manager has said the work type is required, so let's set that up here. Let's say help desk work type is required. So it's not hidden, it is required, it will show up in red. Then for that service area, if someone selects that service area as the area for the request or the fault report, then they have to specify the work type. If the service area manager has not specified anything in their preferences, then the fallback, of course, is back to the primary manager setup. So we'll then say, okay, what does the primary manager say about this? Is work type required, yes or no? So that allows each individual service area manager to tweak that particular bit of the new help desk issue and the new service request form so that it reflects how they want it to work for their service area. Each service area manager also has things like, when do I want the status of an issue updated to in progress? And you may well realize that that's quite important, because when you change the status to in progress, it automatically sends a message, a notification back to the person who logged the issue, the caller. So you have the options here of saying, well, it's manually or on manually / on first instruction. That means, when you first issue a works order against it. So you might make some additional changes initially to the team or the person in charge of an issue, or setting the priority or changing the target date. And none of those things would trigger a change of status to in progress if you had your service area manager setting on this option manually on first instruction. If, however, you set it to on first change, then as soon as you change any of those things, i.e. things like priority, target date, changing the person who's in charge of it, assigning it out to a team, then the status automatically goes to in progress. And because the status has changed, then the caller automatically gets a notification. So another example of how service area managers can control how the service area requests behave for general members of staff when they're logging requests for that particular service area. And we also have some other things at the top, and you can see them all here: disable help desk urgency option, disable the charge account option. So you can set those yes or no, and each service area can do those separately. I wanted to draw your attention to this one in particular, because this is a relatively new thing: minimum required advance notification for new help desk issue service requests, new help desk service requests. So for this service area, I am saying I need, if someone's making a request for this service area, I need at least 1 hour's notice. Now, I could set that to anything. So the grounds manager might say, well, if someone wants some work done in the grounds, we need at least 24 hours notice before we can do that. In which case they would set that in the grounds service manager preferences. They would set that to 1 day, or optionally 24 hours. Note that you can also set up these advanced notification requirements for individual standard tasks. What are the standard tasks? The standard tasks are the things that are on the pick lists. So if we go through to start logging a new issue and we select, say, cleaning services, we've got some pick lists down here: bathroom clean, clean carpet, office clean, standard room, standard full room clean, standard high level clean, and so on. Each one of these things could have a minimum notification period required against them. And you set those up on the standard tasks tab. We're not dealing with that specifically today, but I just wanted to draw your attention to that in relation to setting up the preferences here, because we have a global setting here, this minimum required advanced notification. We have a global setting that is both on the primary manager preference. So the primary manager can set this globally, and if the service manager hasn't set it differently, then of course it is the primary manager preference that controls what happens. But each individual service manager can set that up independently, in which case, as soon as someone selects that service area for the request, that is the control that manages what happens. And then beyond that, you can drill down into the standard tasks and look at those settings for individual standard tasks on your pick lists. So I hope that's given you a much better handle on what happens in relation to targeting. What needs to be set up? Let's just recap on that. Minimum requirement that you have a primary manager. It's not possible to run a site without a primary manager, so that's a given. And if you only have a primary manager, then everything goes to the primary manager. If you then specify a primary help desk manager and nothing else, then everything goes to the primary help desk manager and nowhere else. However, if you then start setting up the individual service area managers and identifying who those are, and your targeting is still just based on issue type, then of course a grounds service request will go to the grounds service manager. A catering service request goes to the catering manager. All premises issues go back to the primary help desk manager on the premises side. And then we come on to targeting by issue and work type. And that's when we come back to looking at the teams, the team setups, those work type remits for the teams. Let's go back in there. Let's just remind you where those are. We go back to my manager home, the employees tab, then the teams sub tab. And if we look at an individual team, we have the tab that says Helpdesk work type remits. So I set up the remits there that match the work types that I want sent through to this particular team. And remember, of course, a team can be just an individual, doesn't have to be multiple people. It's simply a way of allowing you to target issues. And of course, an individual can be a member of multiple teams. That's perfectly possible too. So that targeting then on issue and work type combined then references the help desk work type remits set up for the individual teams in order to decide how that issue is targeted. So that should have given you a good understanding of how all of that works. Can I remind you that, of course, there is the user guide. And if you just go to the user guide quick find, I'll just remind you that that is here. It's on the front screen. The little question mark button simply opens the guide. But if you click into the text field underneath and you say type in manager preferences and hit return, it will give you a list of matches from my user guide. And the top match there is setting up manager preferences. Flow360 will click on that. And that takes you into the page from the user guide that basically steps you through all of those settings we've just been looking at. All of the primary manager preference settings, all of the service manager preferences, goes through each of those, tells you what they do, gives you a little bit of additional detail, additional information, and then the primary manager helpdesk preferences for the primary helpdesk manager. So those are all there. It's all in the user guide. Do refer back to that because we've covered quite a lot of ground here, and there are lots of options here for how you set up the help desk, how you set up the teams, how you want the targeting to work, and the different options that are there for each service area manager to really fine-tune the way that the help desk process works when staff are logging issues for that particular service area. So I hope that's been useful. If you have questions, of course, contact us at support@flow360.net, and we hope to see you again for a future tutorial online.